Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Eminent 2021, tackling the topic Digital Education for a More Inclusive Future. My name is Konstantinos Andronikidis, and I have the honor and the pleasure to be your host today. Eminent 2021 is organized by European Schoolnet, a not-for-profit international association federating 33 ministries of education from across Europe, committed to explore and advance innovation in teaching and learning. Our mission is to support education stakeholders in the transformation of education processes in the 21st century. Our ambition is to act as an interface between policy and practice, bringing together ministries of education, schools, research institutes, and industry stakeholders, enabling a fruitful exchange and collaboration relationship. Integration of digital in formal education has been a significant focus of European Schoolnet's work for more than 2 decades. However, the challenges faced by education systems during the COVID-19 outbreak, together with the acceleration of development and integration of emerging and disruptive technologies, suggest that the world as we know it is radically changing, possibly at a higher pace than we may have expected. And we cannot ignore that education is in fact one of the sectors that will drastically be impacted by the integration of such technologies, not only in the learning, teaching, and assessment, but also in aspects of inclusion, equity, and access. For these reasons, European Schoolnet is dedicating this year's Eminent Conference, its first ever to be taking place online, on the importance that digital technologies can play in promoting and securing a more accessible and inclusive education for all. To discuss this topic, we have the honor to have with us today high-level representatives from our member ministries of education, the European Commission, the European Parliament, as well as from the academic and non-governmental fields. But before we start, we'd like to let you know that all information regarding the program and the speakers of today is accessible in the networking area of the platform. If you experience any technical issue or need to contact us during the day, please check out the information that is provided at our info desk. Throughout the day's discussions, you are able to use the chat functionality to ask questions to our guests or to share your views with our participants. We'd also like to let you know that today's sessions will all be recorded and will be made available after the event on European Schoolnet's YouTube channel and social media. Lastly, we are very excited to announce that today and tomorrow we are hosting a virtual exhibition in the exhibition space of the Eminent platform. In that space, you will find more information about European Schoolnet's key focus areas, projects, and activities, as well as interesting facts and information of some of European Schoolnet's industry partners that support and collaborate with us through the years. To officially open Eminent 2021 online conference, I now have the pleasure and honor to invite European Schoolnet's chair, Mr. Jan de Craemer, to take the virtual stage. Jan de Craemer has been elected as the new chair of European Schoolnet in summer 2021 by the network's steering committee. He is also, since 1998, responsible for coordinating the ICT and digital media policies at the Flemish Ministry of Education and Training, and he currently represents Flanders to the European Commission Delta Working Group on Digital Education. Mr. de Craemer, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Konstantinos, for the introduction. So, dear ministers, dear deputy ministers and state secretaries, dear colleagues of the European Commission and European Schoolnet, industry partners and colleagues, on behalf of European Schoolnet, I'm honored to welcome each of you at the Eminent Conference of 2021. While we had hoped that we would be able to call this conference a post-COVID event, unfortunately, we still are committed to organizing this conference in a digital format, because many European countries still suffer from the fourth COVID wave, and schools are faced with lockdowns or with large numbers of pupils, teachers, and students who are unable to physically attend lessons due to the pandemic. But the very fact that we can gather here together today and that we are able to have this online event shows us also the strengths and the possibilities of digital technologies for collaboration. It is due to our access to devices and high-speed bandwidth and collaborative software that during this Eminent we will be able to learn from each other, to exchange practices and expertise, and to collaborate and to connect with each other. Today's online Eminent conference on the digital education could not have been organized at a more opportune moment in time. Our conference will touch upon two important lessons that we have learned from the COVID-19 period, the distance learning that schools had to adapt to, and its impact on education, namely the importance of digital inclusion and equity, and also the potential offered by the European Recovery and Resilience Facility instruments to support the transformation of education systems in all our countries. Let me say a few words about why we have chosen those particular topics. First of all, on the topic of equity. The COVID crisis clearly exposed a number of barriers for digital education, ranging from an outdated infrastructure over a lack of skills by many teachers to a general unreadiness for the digital world. And moreover, a digital divide became clear. While we were perceiving the digital divide as a lack of skills or a lack of cultural capital to make the most of technology, we lost view on a much more basic problem: poverty and bad housing, a lack of connectivity and bad bandwidth in households, or pupils that had to share devices with brothers and sisters, or a lack of access to devices altogether. It is now very clear that a special focus is also needed for pupils and students of vulnerable and underprivileged families. An inclusive society needs to take e-inclusion or digital inclusion very seriously. And it's my strong belief that ICT can make the biggest difference for pupils with special needs. For those students, technology can make the difference between a social life or isolation, between the ability to learn or a lack of opportunity. There are lots of programs in place to support pupils with special needs, and guidelines are available to support universal design for learning principles. But more can be done. So let us share good practices and invest in the implementation of universal design principles. It's important to mention also that international surveys pointed out issues such as infrastructure, digital competence of teachers, and inclusion policies, and the COVID-19 situation revealed the tangible impact of this situation. So there's a momentum to act now. And I'm glad that the inclusion issue is one of the key topics of this conference, and I look forward to learn from your approaches. Secondly, on the digital transformation and the RRF programs. European collaboration and support will be key to tackle all the issues that I mentioned and to help us transforming school education and education systems. Also, in this field, a lot of measures are being taken with regards to curriculum reforms, infrastructure supply, teacher training, continuous professional development, the provision of learning resources, and the strengthening of the ICT support structures in schools. But we have reached a point where ICTs link with almost every aspect of school life. And this goes far beyond what happens in the classroom and what is related to curriculum and the learning process. It touches upon physical learning environment, upon the school policies on bullying and well-being, upon the support of pupils with special needs, the school communication policies, parental involvement, and in-service training provision for teachers. It's essential that we could embrace the digital transition as part of a whole school approach, and that we could enlighten teaching practices with new insights from the research. With regards to the edtech industry, in view of European Schoolnet, it's important to foster a dialogue and a bridge between the edtech industry and the education institutions, between the ones who make and create the technology and the ones who will use it. This is exactly what we try to reach within our Future Classroom Lab program, bringing together the worlds of industry and those of research, policy, and practitioners. Emerging technologies are probably the most visible aspect of digital education. The future of all these very promising technologies must be ensured with the establishment of clear criteria based on independent and rigorous pedagogical research and providing evidence-based guidance that allows schools and governments to make effective use of all these emerging technologies. Ladies and gentlemen, during this conference, we will hear from many different countries and the European perspective. Let me close with some reflections on our work plan in this respect. The 2022 work program of European Schoolnet continues to address the priorities defined by its ministries. In 2021, the European Commission has started implementing the new Digital Education Action Plan, and European Schoolnet continues to monitor the development of the DIAP and whenever possible provided support in some of the actions of the Digital Education Action Plan. In addition to that, all the member states are active for implementing their Recovery and Resilience Facility national programs. Also in this context, European Schoolnet will work closely with its network of ministries to support them in the education dimension of their plans. Finally, I would like to thank the colleagues from European Schoolnet for their excellent work in organizing this day, and I wish you all a fruitful and instructive conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. de Craemer, for this welcoming speech and for reiterating again the main priorities of European Schoolnet and some of the core areas and projects that we are working on. Thank you very much, and I hope you also enjoy the conference today.
Thank you.
We are now honored to welcome a speech from Dr. Simona Kustec, Slovenian Minister of Education, Science and Sport, on behalf of the current Slovenian Presidency of the European Council. Dr. Kustec was a full professor at the Faculty of Social Sciences in the Department of Political Sciences and Chair of Policy Analysis and Public Administration. Her focus of research was a study of elections and electoral behavior, democracy, and various public policies, including sports. Dr. Kustec led the largest deputy group in the history of the Slovenian Parliament and coordinated the work between the coalition members in the National Assembly. Dr. Kustec, thank you very much for your address. The floor is yours.
High representatives, dear ministers and state secretaries, dear experts and online participants from Europe and all around the world. I would like to wish you a warm welcome to the yearly European Schoolnet conference. For 23 years, European Schoolnet has contributed to the advancement of digital education in Europe and beyond, and has become an important stakeholder in reshaping the quality of education. I can highlight two important visible results that have contributed significantly to raising the quality of learning since the launch of online learning in spring 2020. First, European Schoolnet conducted a major survey with the main aim to analyze teaching practices during these changed circumstances, as well as provide some ideas for policy actions. Results were published in Perspectives issue on learning lessons, how to beat resilience. Second, using the results of webinars on various topics on learning, the European Schoolnet recently published a report where collective learning experiences have been represented. All actions have common enablers: effective school leadership, a strong connection of schools and their local communities, and support for those at risk of being left behind. Key lesson learned from the webinars was that each school and teacher is different and that there are no one-size-fits-all solutions. Each school had a different starting point in March 2020 and coped differently with the task of organizing online and blended learning. Therefore, they also have different needs and visions on how to move forward toward a better school progress. Digitalization and digital education in particular is one of the priorities of the Slovenian Presidency of the Council of the European Union. I'm glad to inform you that education ministers of the EU and the ASC Council last week adopted Council recommendation on blended learning approaches to achieve the goal of high quality and inclusive primary and secondary education. The document includes recommendations for integrated and effective learning and teaching in blended environments and in different approaches, from teaching in person at school or at a distance and outdoors, in stimulating safe and teaching-rich learning environments. We believe that together with our main event, conference Resetting Education and Training for the Digital Age, Slovenia opened up the space for discussion on the opportunities and challenges of digital education, as well as artificial intelligence among various stakeholders, from practitioners and researchers to decision makers. Emerging technologies, including artificial intelligence, play an increasingly important role in our lives. We firmly believe that artificial intelligence can contribute to teaching in a positive and effective way. But we also believe that education must play an important role in the future development of artificial intelligence for the sake of the needs of human beings, people and teachers. We see many areas that still need to be discussed in this regard: legislation, ethics, equal opportunities, protection of personal data, securing and privacy in the digital world are the topics that we need to address. We also believe that cooperation and co-creation of all stakeholders is the key factor for the future educational process. Similarly, to the EU level, we started in spring 2020 to prepare the Slovenian Digital Education Action Plan 21 to 27, which we expect to be approved by the end of this year. Priority areas of our National Digital Education Action Plan include comprehensive national coordination of digital education, the definition of a theory and practice of digital education, curricular reform with the integration of digital competencies at all levels, the initial and continuous training of teachers, and the upgrading of the overall support environment for the digitalization of education. Special attention will be given to the pedagogical digital competencies of teachers. Finally, the schools will be invited to make their own digital strategy and consider it as one of the main school priorities. In addition, national projects are connected with the broad EU actions such as Code Week, e-twinning, Erasmus Plus and Horizon. Also, we contribute to the progress of global education along with our International Research Center in Artificial Intelligence under the auspices of UNESCO, IRCAI, whose activities are expanding daily in the EU and beyond. Together with the promotion of digital competence frameworks and practical self-evaluation tools, we would like to maintain the holistic approach in the raising of school quality. Dear guests, dear and honorable participants, when European Schoolnet started, the first priority was to promote and disseminate digital education among teachers. This year, Slovenia became an active member of the EU and EUN again, and we will further connect Slovenian stakeholders and teachers with EUN activities. Thanks again to European Schoolnet for all its activities and results, and for organizing the annual Eminent conference. I wish all today's participants a successful 10th anniversary conference, many fruitful conversations and informative panels. Thank you very much for your attention. Stay well and healthy.
Thank you very much, dear Minister, for sharing your views and for also sharing the priorities of the Slovenian presidency about the field of education. Especially, we are very happy that the Slovenian presidency priorities and the European Commission priorities are very much in line with the work that the European Schoolnet has been doing for the past 20 years, more than 20 years actually, in the area of digital education. We're also very happy to see that the new recommendations that were accepted were voted for in the last Education Ministers' Council. And we look forward to working with all of you, the members of European Schoolnet, the members of the European Union, and the European Commission, of course, into implementing and to supporting the ministries and the national school systems to integrate such recommendations into their schooling. We'd also like to take a moment and thank Slovenia and welcome the country once more into our network of member ministries of education, since the country just joined the network this year. We will now take a moment to watch a video that has been prepared from our side regarding the priorities of European Schoolnet and the key focus of today's conference before we move on with our next speaker. So now you have the time to watch the video. How much time do you need? And we are back with our program. To introduce the topic of this year's Eminent conference, we have the honor to have with us Ms. Andersson, Finland's Minister of Education. Ms. Andersson was appointed Finland's Minister of Education in June 2019, and she is chairperson of the Left Alliance Party and is currently serving her second term as Member of Parliament. Before and during her political career, Ms. Andersson has had numerous responsibilities in civil society organizations and trade unions. She has been a steady advocate for human rights, equality, civil society, as well as social and ecological sustainability. Dear Minister, it is a great pleasure to have you today with us. Good morning and welcome to the conference.
Thank you very much, dear friends. Over the last couple of years, European societies have been faced with an unprecedented amount of sudden change and turmoil. It has been impossible to miss how immensely important resiliency is for our societies. Our ability to adapt to new circumstances has been greatly tested, underlining the need to invest in skills, that is to say, to invest in people. Europe's future well-being and success depends on how well we take care of our growth factors, and the pandemic, if nothing else, has helped us realize the profound and fundamental value of human capital. Everything else rests on that foundation. All around the world, schools have experienced enormous disruption, worsening learning gaps and inequalities at an unprecedented scale. All too often, those who were already in a vulnerable position have been hit the hardest. In many less advanced countries, there is a real danger of serious setbacks regarding girls' education. And another problem, one facing all societies, are hampered educational paths, resulting in difficulties with completing studies and in entering the labor market. This may risk a future rise in youth unemployment, with the lack of prospects leading on to a path toward marginalization. In short, there is an urgent need to make use of education, skills, and innovation to lead the way for renewal and recovery. It is critical to invest in them as key drivers of a more sustainable future. And make no mistake, education spending is not a mandatory cost or an expenditure, it is an investment. If I may, I'll use Finland's experiences during COVID as a concrete example. In the spring of 2020, we had a short nationwide closure of schools. but this did not mean that teaching and learning ceased. Instead, our educators moved their classrooms online on a very short notice. The successful transition to distance learning was made possible by the teachers' high level of professional and digital competence, and the society's other previous investments into education and digitalization. Finnish teachers have long had plenty of autonomy in their work, and they know how to put the individual learner in focus. Both traits have been highly beneficial in the pandemic. Peer support and networks and support from the national authorities is of course vital as well, and the government has provided guidance and support materials throughout the duration of the pandemic. But at the same time, we have seen that distance learning cannot fully replace classroom teaching. Without direct contact in person, problems associated with inequality inevitably worsen, and the importance of parents' ability to help their children grows exponentially. It became clear just how crucial schools are for ensuring an equal right to learn for everyone. They are much more than just places for learning. Schools provide social networks of safety and well-being, including a warm meal for all children and youth. In May 2020, for the 2 final weeks before summer holidays, we made an important decision to resume classroom teaching. This time gave our teachers an opportunity to assess the learning gaps and to devise plans for the autumn semester to overcome these gaps. We cannot accept any gaps in learning to persist and have therefore appointed extra funding to overcome them. Over the summer of 2020, we also introduced temporary legislative amendments to allow local authorities to use exceptional learning arrangements flexibly based on the actual circumstances concerning the pandemic on the ground and locally. As the pandemic struck, Finnish schools already had tutor teachers and mentors, as well as other peer support mechanisms for facilitating the use of digital tools and digital learning environments. This proved to be extremely valuable. While only 10% of our teachers had poor digital skills before the pandemic, the increased use of ICT in teaching has also highlighted areas that need our attention. These include the pedagogical application of technology and multiliteracy skills. We have launched the New Literacies program to strengthen the students' ICT competences, media literacy, and programming skills right from early childhood education onward. The Finnish National Agency for Education and the National Audiovisual Institute also provide teachers and schools with support material and in-service training for teaching digital skills and to support their pedagogical application. As you all probably know, the pandemic has proved stressful for the majority of the teaching and guidance staff. The workload of teachers and principals has increased, and they have needed to constantly adapt to new and ever-changing circumstances and conditions. It is important to put a strong focus on supporting the well-being and strength of school communities and educational institutions. Practices that support a sense of community need to be developed systematically. This will also help us support the well-being of pupils and students who have faced very similar issues. Finnish studies show that while 4 in 5 upper secondary school students felt that distance learning had no impact on learning outcomes, almost half said that their motivation to study had weakened during the remote learning period. This is a good reminder that we cannot ignore the social aspects of school and of education. To put it briefly, all over Europe and the world, the pandemic has accelerated the call to reimagine teaching and learning. In Finland, the key lessons and takeaways we've taken from the past couple of years can be summarized as follows. First, We believe that flexible education systems tend to be more resilient. Flexibility enables inventive and more agile solutions, which can be adjusted to better suit local and individual needs. Secondly, the creativity, skills, and leadership of teachers is a major resilience factor. In Finland, teachers are highly educated and possess significant professional autonomy. We have also invested heavily in their digital competences in recent years. Thirdly, the pandemic pushes us to continue investing in equality on all levels of education. To help strengthen continuous learning and to raise the educational level of the entire society, we have recently extended the minimum school leaving age to 18 years. This reform makes upper secondary education completely free of charge, free of cost, including learning materials, and will aid us with preventing exclusion. Since the risk of unemployment is greatly reduced upon gaining an upper secondary degree, this will have a very real positive impact for the whole of society and, of course, foremost for the youth. Dear participants, I would next like to say a few words about how we advance inclusion in Finnish education. The efforts to combat exclusion in society starts in the early years, after all, and it is far better to preempt problems than to try to fix them later on. How and where we should teach pupils requiring special needs support is an issue that prompts wide-ranging discussion. It has been addressed in the media, in the day-to-day work of schools, and in the everyday life of the parents. The crux of the debate is whether such education should be provided together with the other pupils, or in a special group, or even in a special school. The concerns often voiced by parents are quite understandable, as the practices in schools and municipalities tend to vary greatly. It is important to note that the challenges in ensuring adequate support cannot be attributed to the advancement of inclusion as such. It is worthwhile to consider whether we should actually focus more on the enhancement of inclusive teaching arrangements, such as the implementation of co-teaching, even in schools still in the early phases of this approach. When it comes to the principle of neighborhood schools and inclusion, Finnish legislation and core curricula provide a framework for the organization of education and support, but they do not require support to be provided in a specific way and place. As early as 2007, a strategy paper on special needs education, commissioned by the Ministry of Education, stated that inclusive education means organizing education in a way that each pupil receives sufficient and timely support for their learning and other growth. To us, inclusion means not only equal educational opportunities, but also the strategies and structures that guarantee successful learning for everyone. Enhancing inclusion means fostering the social interaction and collaborative spirit in the classroom, group, and school, as well as introducing pedagogical practices that benefit all pupils and students. Inclusiveness is a principle that implies an improvement of both the system and the operating structures. At the same time, we should advocate for a culture and pedagogic methods that promote the success of each and every pupil in their studies, while fostering good growth and development. The guiding principle should be that support follows the child, with said support being primarily directed to a regular teaching group and an ordinary school. The teacher must have our trust and support to find good, effective solutions in the circumstances at hand. The first thing to examine is whether the neighborhood school has the capacity to teach the pupil requiring special support. If their need for support is so great that the neighborhood school cannot provide it, teaching and learning will be arranged in a smaller group. The instruction of pupils with the most severe developmental disabilities can be arranged by activity areas rather than by subjects, specified in individual learning plans. We must depart from the principle that enhancing inclusion is synonymous with enhancing regular education. It also means fostering a community spirit in the classroom, study group, and in the school, as well as introducing everyday activities that benefit everyone. In Finland, inclusion does not mean that flexible small groups are altogether abandoned. The aim is to achieve a schooling system where all pupils, including those in need of special support, are accepted with their individual characteristics. The advancement of inclusion must not be too rapid either. In Finland, teachers and principals have to possess sufficient skills to successfully promote inclusiveness. In some countries where full inclusion has been swiftly implemented through a regulatory process, the result has often been a physical integration of pupils in need of special support. The competence of teachers and principals is a vital cornerstone in the advancement of inclusion, and it must be an integral part of the basic training of all future teachers. We need to provide them with updated skills and capabilities to encounter different kinds of children. A new mindset is also crucial, for the attitudes of parents, guardians, and teachers play a key role. We also need to develop new teaching practices and new ways of doing things, such as cooperative teaching, co-teachership, and multi-professional cooperation, without forgetting cooperative learning, flexible grouping of learners, and well-functioning counseling services. The Finnish Right to Learn program, currently being implemented, aims to secure an equal start for learning by improving quality and equality in early childhood and basic education. The goal is to reduce and prevent learning differences and to strengthen support for learning. The Right to Learn program incorporates legislative and financial changes and promotes practices and methods that strengthen equality. As a part of the recent expansion of compulsory schooling, we have also implemented a student counseling development program in basic and secondary education. The goal is to strengthen student guidance, practices, cooperation, and continuity, especially from primary school to secondary school, but also towards further studies or working life. It is important that we pay attention to those students who have learning difficulties and provide the needed support for their studies as early as possible. To this end, we identified some general points to which attention should be paid in the future. First, the identification of the learner's needs and the delivery of individual support must be improved on all levels of education. We must pay more attention to the needs of different learners and special groups in their pedagogical development. Secondly, the digital and pedagogical competences of students, as well as of the teaching and guidance staff, are crucially important. Equal access to devices and software is vital too. Third, the national steering of education has to be systematic, concrete, and timely. On the local level, efforts to improve the coping and well-being of the students and to support the work of the teaching and guidance staff need to be ramped up. Dear friends, the pandemic has provided us an opportunity to rethink how to balance inequalities and to ensure quality education for everyone, all the while developing better infrastructure for education for the future. Online learning and teaching have revealed both inequality and innovation. Inequality in terms of access to devices and access to the internet, but also in terms of skills and competences needed to teach, study, and learn at distance and level of support available. Innovation took place in online learning and teaching, supported by diverse learning environments, open educational resources, and emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence. The crisis has also increased our awareness on the importance of inclusion and access to flexible learning opportunities, open educational resources, latest research, and to virtual learning environments and platforms that enable learning, sharing, and innovation. In the future, blended learning models, combinations of online and traditional classroom instruction may become more normal, especially for older students. But learners of all ages must be included. Continuous learning, lifelong and life-wide, has never been as urgent as it is today. Digitalization has an important role to play, especially when opening up new learning paths, regardless of the learner's life situation. In Finland, we are currently preparing a parliamentary reform on continuous learning, since the changing demands of working life will continue to increase the need for upskilling and reskilling. It is vitally important that all our data and experiences are jointly coordinated and exchanged at the European level. The European Schoolnet is an excellent platform for this. Common projects such as Access at Learning, focusing on digital formative evaluation, and Future Classroom Lab, with its contribution towards embracing different learning styles and more personalized active learning, as well as better learning environments for improved engagement and classroom interaction, serve as great examples of the benefit of close, forward-looking cooperation. Dear friends, dear fellow Europeans, there is a clear link between a nation's prosperity and the education system's capacity to equip all citizens with the necessary competences for employment, innovation, and general well-being. Good education also leads to longer working lives, better health, and longer lives. In addition, as we've recently witnessed, it is incredibly important to provide the entire population with good critical thinking skills, enabling them to better resist the mis- and disinformation that they will come across both on and offline. Education is the key component in all of this. Education, training, and research are central in our recovery from COVID and far beyond. The question we will need to ask ourselves is not whether we can afford the cost of education, but rather, can we afford the cost of lack of education? Equal access to high-quality education and training is the only conceivable path towards a successful future. Investment in human capital is the way forward for any nation and any continent. With these words, I hope to instill a sense of well-warranted importance and weight upon the upcoming discussions. Our future is in your hands. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, dear Minister, for these lovely words and for also highlighting Finland's main reforms and policies with regards to inclusion in education, and especially the aspects that regard the digital aspect when it comes to fostering inclusion in schools. It's really great to see the example that you lead as a country. Of course, Finland is very high in front in the innovation of education, and we're very happy to have you as member of the organization. It's just to highlight some of the parts that you mentioned, the new policies and the approach that you are taking towards inclusion with of course, the increase of the schooling years, the provision of free resources and materials to all students, and of course, the support to the teachers from all different levels is something that we really welcome, and it's something that I think is very much needed in a time when, of course, as you mentioned, learning is not always it's not only in school, but it's going to be continuing throughout life. And of course, the skills that we learn at school is really not only the materials that we share with the teachers, but it's also lifelong learning skills and 21st century skills, as we call it. collaboration, exchange, problem solving that is very, very important for the adults of the society. We would like to thank you very much for being with us today, and also for outlining the main priorities of Finland and of your ministry. And we hope to have you again soon with us in a future event. Thank you very much and have a good day.
Thank you.
We now continue with our program, but before we go through our next session, since we just finished with the introductory interventions, we'd like to give you an overview of the program that we will follow today. So the next session will be some keynote speeches that we have arranged. We are having with us today some excellent speakers from the non-governmental and academic fields that will, as you can see in the program that is now shared with us, we have Professor Rose Lakin, and then we have Mr. Javier Prat-Monet and Mr. Ulf Matissiak, who will address different topics with regards to digital education and inclusion. Once we finish with this, we'll take a short break, and then we will go after this to a roundtable discussion with some ministers of education and state secretaries of education, where we will kind of address the topics around inclusion, digital education, and how this can be implemented into the national policy reforms. After this, we're going to have a lunch break of about an hour, and then we will come back for the second roundtable discussion, which will focus more on European and national collaboration on programs related to educational reform. And of course, we will have also the opportunity to hear more about the European instrument, the European Recovery and Resilience Facility instrument that is now being launched by the European Commission. We will also have the opportunity to have a representative from the European Commission to talk about this more. And then we have the great honor to have with us the chair of the European Parliament's Committee on Education and Culture, who will address the audience. And of course, we will close with words of the executive director of the organization, Mark Durando. And now, before we move on again with our next session, let me take a brief moment and show you our exhibition space, where we highlight some of the information and projects and activities of European Schoolnet. As you can see, the key focus areas of European Schoolnet are in the yellow area. We have the main kind of teams that comprise the organization, and there you can find information about the projects, the main initiatives. Some of them are run on behalf of the European Commission, of course, but you will be able to learn more, and of course take a moment and check it out once we're done. You will also have the opportunity to see some of our industry partners there. Not all are being, of course, exhibited, but some of them are with us for many years, and you will have the opportunity to see some of their activities and some of their new initiatives that are taking part. So now we were supposed to have Minister Bianchi, the Italian Minister of Education, with us today, but to close the event. But unfortunately, due to unforeseen circumstances, he wasn't able to be there with us today and to connect online. And therefore, he has shared with us a written statement that I will briefly read with you all. So the minister says, "Dear all, it is with great regret that I cannot be with you today to close this conference as planned, but sudden institutional commitments have occurred. With this letter, I would like to express my best appreciation for the work of Eminent 2021 on digital education for a more inclusive future that European Schoolnet organized today. In these months, the pandemic and the climate crisis have made it clear to the world that education has a critical role to play in economic and social recovery and growth. The pandemic and the climate crisis are demonstrating that we need to change course to address inequality and discrimination, and to ensure the regeneration of our economic and social models by facilitating green and digital transitions. Today's crises are reminding us that knowledge and skills are not something static, but dynamic elements in continuous, rapid evolution that allow us to respond to, and above all, steer change. It is therefore clear that having quality, inclusive, and digitally advanced education and training systems is a prerequisite for achieving the long-term goal of having digital and, above all, sustainable societies. For this, it is necessary to reflect on the meaning of education in order to initiate a transformation of systems, the twin transition. The Italian government, and in particular the Italian Ministry of Education, is going beyond the provision of individual interventions on digital objectives, but it is creating a systemic approach. All the measures and financial and human resources are integrated and focused on the acquisition of new skills for the structural and organizational digitalization and sustainability, pursuing the objective of regenerating the school, ensuring an inclusion. No one has to be left behind. At the European level, I believe it is necessary for the member states, communities, research centers, and citizens to join efforts in a broad alliance for digital and green transition with a whole of government approach and targeted investments. Digital technologies and artificial intelligence must be integrated into the educational approaches in the whole EU in order to facilitate the development of so-called computational thinking and transversal problem-solving skills. It is necessary to define educational methodologies that create inclusive learning opportunities, providing as a sphere of influence all levels of education and training, as well as measures for updating the skills of the teaching staff. With this vision, we are working to implement the measures of the Italian National Recovery and Resilience Plans, which include investments in strengthening both the hardware part and training on new skills, as well as a component that acts precisely on inclusion and social inequalities. It is therefore essential to invest harmonically in the development of digital skills, but also of advanced, sustainable, cognitive, and social behavioral skills, so that European citizens, and above all, young people, can maintain a high degree of employability throughout their lives. And from an overall point of view, human capital is increased with positive effects on the willingness and ability to face the new challenges that await us. In this framework, I believe that the role of European Schoolnet shall be fundamental to the shared experiences and practices from all countries thanks to its network. Sure, that work, your work, continues to be productive, inspiring, and actionable. I hope to have the opportunity to meet with you all soon. Yours sincerely, Professor Patrizio Bianchi. Thank you very much, Professor Bianchi, for this address, and hopefully we will be able to see you again in another of our events. We are now continuing with our next part, and we will start with the keynote speeches for today. For this session, we are very much encourage you to use the chat and post questions to our guests, as we will have some time for questions and answers right after their addresses. We will start with the keynote speech from Javier Prat-Monet, Special Advisor of Teach for All, and Ulf Matischak, CEO of Teach First Deutschland, who will share their views on how we can transform education with digital technologies while at the same time making it more inclusive. Mr. Monet is currently the Special Advisor of Teach for All, a global non-profit organization whose mission is to expand educational opportunity across the world. He is also the Senior Advisor for Strategic Initiatives of the Open University of Catalonia, the President of the European Committee of the King Baudouin Foundation, and Chief Advisor to the Board of the European Institute for Innovation and Technology. He previously served at the European Commission as Director General for Education and Culture, Director General for Health and Food Safety, Director for Employment Policy, Deputy Chief of Staff of the Vice President for Foreign Affairs, and Assistant Spokesman to President Jacques Delors. Mr. Matysiak has been with Teach First Deutschland since its foundation in 2008. He was appointed CEO in 2011 and is one of the 6 shareholders of the organization. Before joining Teach First Deutschland, Ulf worked as a teacher for German as a foreign language and teacher trainer at International House, a global network of language schools. We'd like to welcome both of you with us today. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation and looking forward to your observation. Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me all right.
Yes, we can hear you perfectly.
Yes, good morning. Well, I know about Schoolnet for many years, and I've been long convinced of its extraordinary potential to realize mutual learning among EU and European countries. So I'm delighted to be here today. As it was said just before, Teach for All is a network of 60 country organizations from Sweden to Kenya to India or Paraguay, united by a simple idea. We need to attract the best people to education and send the best teachers to the most difficult schools. This is a basic principle based on the idea that no education system is better than the quality of its teachers. So this is what we do. We train young people as teachers and send them for 2 years to a disadvantaged school of their country. Now, with the pandemic, one question has been at the top of our agenda everywhere. Can we use technology as a tool for excellence and inclusion? Now, this, of course, is an old question, but few people were actually considering it seriously until the pandemic forced us to do so. So, drawing on the experience of the Teach for All network globally, here are 3 simple lessons that we have learned. And then Ulf will tell you more about the German case. Now, the first lesson is that frugal technology, low technology, can be an extraordinary tool to personalize education. Now, one of the biggest challenges for teachers in traditional classrooms is to meet the many different needs of their students. And personalizing lessons is very difficult, particularly in large classrooms. Now, during the pandemic, we found that many teachers experience the power of technology to make that personalization easier. I'll give an example. One of our teachers in Pakistan, Rabia Chowdhury is her name, she set up a WhatsApp school as a way to reach her students, most of whom had access to data-enabled phones, but not to laptops. She sent assignments via WhatsApp groups and then had her students send their work back via individual chats so that she could give feedback and engage directly with students and parents. Now, soon students were sending voice notes back with her questions, and they got a level of individual attention from the teacher that they could not get possibly in a classroom of 50 students. So when the pandemic is finally over, and it will be over one day, Rabia will keep her WhatsApp school as a permanent part of her teaching to allow students to move at their own pace and to keep parents involved. Now, a second simple lesson is that ensuring equitable access to technology is, of course, a massive challenge, but we can do it if we focus on the right priorities. Now, talk of the digital divide often sounds like a binary of the haves and the have-nots, but in reality, there's a spectrum, and students can move from having access to no device, to a basic phone, to a smartphone, to a tablet, to a laptop. And discussions around EdTech are often centered on questions such as, when will artificial intelligence predict student behavior better than teachers can do? Now, while technology may well arrive at that point one day, this is a prospect that is not around the corner. And there are much more urgent and compelling questions and priorities, such as, how can we get a smartphone to every family? Smartphones penetration in sub-Saharan Africa today is about 45% and will grow to 65% by 2025. Now, that still means that 1 in 3 Africans still has no prospect of even the most rudimentary online learning in the next few years. So if we focus our energy on moving the needle on statistics like this one, we will make a greater contribution to both educational excellence and equity in the world than if we stay focused on questions such as machine learning and its future. Only a small fraction of the world's kids have access to their own laptop and high-speed broadband, either at school or at home. But many more families, even in the poorest countries and communities, have access to a smartphone. So familiar platforms such as WhatsApp, YouTube, hold the biggest promise for the children who currently have least access to the best educational resources. A third lesson is that access to technology will not get us anywhere without investing in teachers. And this is a very simple point. But the loudest message I have heard from our network's teachers, tens of thousands of them, is that in making the most of education technology, the technology is the least part, is the easy part. The hardest and more important part is developing strong teacher practice to leverage technology effectively. Technology in the hands of poorly trained teachers has very negative impact on students, and the power of technology rests on teacher development to change their practice. Now, in order to transform technology into an instrument of excellence and inclusion, we need to bring together the technical expertise of software developers with the educators who understand pedagogy and the needs of students and teachers. Because the best EdTech entrepreneurs are the people who were in the classroom and have a real respect for the teacher profession. And the good news is that those teachers, that teacher profession, is ready and available resource to have and has a lot of energy to ensure that their students get access to all the opportunities they need. So during this pandemic, we have seen great innovation from teachers. COVID-19 shut down schools and forced everyone, teachers in the first place, to find higher and low-tech solutions to reach students. We're not going back to how things were before COVID-19. Teachers around the world have spent the pandemic learning how to leverage technology in their work and creating their own materials. They will not throw all of that work into the trash and pretend that it all didn't happen. So we need to encourage this creativity and initiative. And as we design the future of education, our starting point should not be how to maximize technology, but rather what we're trying to accomplish and how we can leverage all of the people and technology at our disposal to reach that goal. This does not mean providing digital resources and laptops. It means thinking of students' outcomes and rethinking the purpose of education. And now, for a specific look at Germany, Ulf will tell you more. Thank you.
Thank you, Celia. Yes, when I started to work on my keynote here, at first I have to say I was afraid that I might get too negative, because if we look back, the first 1.5 to almost 2 years of COVID, you have to say that our students that we work with in low-income areas, a lot of them with special needs, were not on the winning end, quite the opposite, especially students who needed more attention, more support, or did not match the standard criteria of, say, a middle-class student with average behavior and acceptable grades. Those students have found themselves on the losing end. And then, as I started to work on my notes here, I still found out that if you dig a little bit deeper, you realize that the future, as you said, Xavier, the education system will look different after COVID-19. We're not getting back to the system we knew before. And there's hope. So even if we're still far from the day where every student has their own device and all the schools have all the internet access they need, if we dig a bit deeper, we see trends that also make me hope for a better educational system, and that we're probably working on that already on the ground. But for the time being, and let me say that first before I move on to other topics. For the time being, we must accept that, at least in Germany, we seem to be at the very, very start of a digitalization process. So when speaking about digital education and inclusion, it still all comes down to the provision of Wi-Fi and technical tools. Even after almost 2 years of COVID, only a good third of schools in low-income areas say that they have sufficient infrastructure for teaching hybrid or digital classes, or also just simply for staying in touch with their students in times of school closures. So in the past, I asked our participants who work in schools in low-income areas in Germany, I asked them what the main challenges were during the lockdowns of schools. And number one on the list was still the technical challenges. So that has to be said, even though I want to move on to with more substantial topics that might be more of relevance in the future. So in the last half year, I spent a lot of my time to sit in meetings of our participants when they will meet in the evenings and gather and share their stories of the day, also the challenges that they faced. And I want to tell you about some lessons that I think I draw from these gatherings from the field. And I've tried to cluster them in a way that might hopefully make some meaning here. The first is that teaching online for our participants, but also for a lot of other colleagues in the staff room, teaching online is like teaching blindfolded. I've heard that a couple of times, and I like the sentence a lot. I think it creates the right picture. Many participants reported how difficult teaching online was, especially because it felt so different and all their instincts didn't quite work. So the most common remarks were, you never quite know who's listening or following the lesson. There are technical problems who make it impossible often for all the students to leave their camera on. In fact, leaving the camera off is not uncommon even in staff meetings. And then you always feel like you'll never get a real response from the class. You are only shooting, but you're not, getting anything back. And that for a lot of teachers creates an enormous challenge. For many students, it also seems to be a lot harder to respond online. The hurdle is just higher for some reason. And you never really get the conversation going. One of the bigger problems, I'll come back to that later, is it's impossible, the teachers say, to monitor the quieter students, those who you see normally when you're in the same room, but you don't see them, you don't really hear them when you teach online. And it's very difficult to change methods during a session. So overall, for us, that has led to a reflective process where we thought, okay, we really have to think different about teaching. We have to spend the time that we have together differently, in a different way than we would if we would be sitting in a classroom. And one lesson I want to share here is we experimented with the flipped classroom method from the Khan Academy. And the idea of this method is quite simple. It is to take the introduction piece out of the moment that you share with the class and more give it as a homework. So a homework piece could mean to watch an online video or any other self-guided material where students get introduced to a new topic or other piece of content. And then you will use the time that you have together with the group to deepen your knowledge or to compare what students have learned or to discuss certain topics of that new piece of content. To a lot of our participants, but also teachers, this is a bit counterintuitive because they feel like they should own especially the piece where they introduce the new content part. But in online teaching, it has led to very positive experiences that we've made to use the homework part and the part where we are not in the same room, rather to explore something and then come back and discuss it. It has to be said that we still lack a lot of German-speaking online learning material. So there's plenty of material in English, but depending on the content area and also on the situation of the students, the area where the students might need special support, especially if they might have learning difficulties, or if their German language skills are not on a native speaker level. It is very difficult to find the right material still, but we hope that over time there will be a larger pool of material available for those who teach. The second lesson is that we were at the beginning focusing on teaching and trying to get it right, like find the right methodology and do good classes. But somehow we forgot that diagnostics that are the foundation of your lesson plan were even more complicated than teaching online, because, as I mentioned before, usually there's so much information that you get as a teacher on a day-to-day level. Like there are hundreds, if not thousands, of pieces of information that you take out of a classroom. Not all of them are related to content or academic achievement. A lot are related to the status quo of the student, if their social emotional status, if they're having a good day or not, if they're engaged, if they're interested in the topic that you're teaching, and so on and so forth. All of these moments that you usually take away now were missing. And again, we needed to experiment a bit to find better ways to deal with that new situation and have a better diagnostical foundation for our lesson plans. We started to use weekly plans where each student gets an individual plan to work through during the week. And the diagnostics that a teacher gets back from these weekly plans is quite accurate and very, very individual. And this, you can build on that and come up with an even better or more diversified plan for the next week. Surely, at first, it means a lot extra work. So during the first weeks, you spend a lot more time planning. But then, because you have less lessons during a school lockdown, but then it totally pays back, and because all the material that you provide is more accurate, and all the diagnostics you get back gives you even more information to plan for the next week. So it's an invest of time at the start, but then it creates a lot better lessons and also more like happier teachers. But even with these weekly plans, it stayed very difficult to actually know how the students were doing apart from academics. So that has to be said. Like it solves a part of the problem in terms of academic content, but not when it comes to the social emotional status of the students. Overall, especially with students with special needs and learning difficulties, what we found out, and that's the third lesson, is that we just need to prepare the students for the moment of a school lockdown. Like a fire alarm is usually trained for in all the schools. We need to train our students for the moment when the school needs to close and we need to shift to online teaching. And that is especially important for students with special needs because it is like very, very important for them to self-organize and be prepared. Not just have the device, also know the platform, be just used to working online, and that's easier to train for when you're not forced to do it, when you do it on a daily basis while you still see each other in the classroom. It is still not common for our schools that we all prepare for the moment of a school lockdown. It is still something that we need to work on a class-by-class basis, to be honest. But as we are in the middle of another school year where school lockdowns remain not unlikely to happen, it is still one of the biggest challenges. And that's not just a technical thing, it's also a pedagogical thing to make sure that students have everything they need in terms of technology, but also in terms of their own self-management skills to then be able to follow the lessons online if need be. And the fourth lesson is that at the foundation of everything that we do, especially in low-income areas, and especially with classes that are highly diverse in terms of the needs of the students, the relationship, the strong relationship that we need to have remains at the very center, at the core of what we do. Only if we are close to the students and can remain close to them on a personal level are we able to actually provide good teaching during a lockdown and good teaching when we are using technology more than we do in a regular school day or school week. One of the most severe mistakes that we did during the first lockdown was to focus too much on academics and the lessons. So we are trying to find ways to get our content to the student. We did not provide enough moments where we were close to the students, we're actually actively listening to how they're doing. We did not find good ways to remain partners at their side. We did a lot better the second and the third lockdown. And that needs to remain the nucleus of everything we do. Like the pedagogy is always about the relationship between a teacher and a learner. There still seems to, that's probably not a technological problem, but more a question of methodology. How can we make sure that we don't lose this nucleus, even if we're not able to meet in person as much as we were used to? But that, to be honest, also seems to be a problem in the world of the grown-ups. We all are suffering from that from time to time. So it is nothing that the school has to solve in an isolated way. It is probably something that we as a society need to learn. These final impressions, these 4 lessons from the classroom, I want to thank you for your attention. To be honest, I draw strength from the fact that teaching is one of the oldest professions we know. So I think for thousands of years, we've taught the next generation, and we usually never really knew what the future might hold. And in my opinion, if we remember not to teach subjects, but students, and if this remains the guiding principle of the opportunities that these new technologies might bring are quite historic, to be honest. So with that, again, I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, both of you, for this very interesting introduction to the topic that we will discuss also a bit in the questions. Thank you also for mentioning all this work and also the findings that you have collected from the lockdown periods. And I leave with this last that you mentioned, that teachers should remember to teach students and not subjects. And we will come back to you once we finish with the keynote speeches for an exchange and Q&A and questions from the audience. So I now again invite the audience to share their questions or ideas or thoughts with us, and we will share it with the speakers. Moving on with our next speaker for today, we are honored to welcome Professor Rose Lakin, who will address the topic of how artificial intelligence can help create digital education tools for a more inclusive world after the COVID-19. Rose Lakin is a professor of learner-centered design at UCL Knowledge Lab in London. She is renowned for her research into the design and evaluation of educational technology and is founder of Educate Ventures Research, a London hub for startups, researchers, and educators developing evidence-based educational technology. She is also past president and current treasurer of the International Society for Artificial Intelligence for Education, co-founder of the Institute for Ethical AI in Education, member of the European AI Alliance, and author of the book Machine Learning and Human Intelligence, The Future of Education for the 21st Century. Professor Lakin, it's a pleasure to have you with us, and I give you now the floor.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, we can hear you very well.
Great. I'm going to share my screen if that's okay.
Yes, you can also share your screen. My colleagues will now also put it on the live stream.
Thank you. Oops. seems to want me to upload my slides. Okay, that maybe not going to work. Okay, I will do it without slides. It's not a problem. Let's not delay at all. Thank you so much for inviting me to talk to you today. It's really interesting, having listened to previous speakers. I really enjoyed the presentations, and I hope that I might say something that could persuade you that actually machine learning does have something to offer when it comes to inequalities in the situation that we faced during the peak of the pandemic, but now ongoing as we move forward, for sure. So I want to tell you a little bit about artificial intelligence and knowledge that not all AI is machine learning, but it is something that's having a huge impact on the world. It's changing the nature of the workplace. We talk about the fourth industrial revolution, and it certainly is really altering the nature of the kinds of skills, knowledge, expertise that we need people to have to be effective in the workplace. And so I think it's something we have to really take on board when it comes to thinking about education across the different sectors of education systems. But what is this thing called AI that empowers automation and revolution in the workplace? Well, there's lots of definitions of artificial intelligence and an awful lot of disagreement amongst lots of academics about exactly what the right definition is. But I think it's perfectly fine to accept a simple definition and think of it as technology capable of actions and behaviours that require intelligence when done by humans. And of course, we're all using AI in the technology-enabled world, whether it's when you're speaking into your phone and recording a text message, that's a form of AI, whether you're using a smart home device or searching on the internet or using a voice-activated assistant like a Siri or Alexa, that's all involving AI. And the reason that artificial intelligence is a key part of this fourth industrial revolution is because we're in a situation of a perfect storm. We have masses and masses of data. It's very easy to collect data in the world today, data about the way people are behaving, for example. And we have very sophisticated artificial intelligence algorithms that can process that data and learn from that data. And we have computing power and memory that's substantial and affordable. And when you put those three things together, you get this perfect storm, because we have the algorithms that can process the data, and we have the computing power and memory to enable those algorithms to process that data. And that creates a fundamental shift in the way that we live and work. And of course, that brings implications for education. And I think it's useful to think about the implications that AI brings to education in three sorts of category. We can use AI to tackle some of the big challenges in education. We can use what's happened with the revolution to think about the way we need to change the nature of our education systems to ensure that people are prepared for a life and their work augmented by AI. And we need to think thirdly about how we educate people to understand enough about AI to use it wisely and safely. But these three ways of thinking about AI in education are not mutually exclusive. They're all highly integrated. If we use more AI, for example, in our education systems, then we understand more about it. And then we can see more how the way that AI works means that we are facing a very different kind of career track for our students. And therefore, we need to think about the nature of the education systems that we operate. But today I want to talk mainly about educating people about AI, but I'm also going to say firstly something about using AI. And I think, this is a point that Xavier made, that in many countries they don't have the bandwidth and they don't have the technology to even be able to access some of these AI systems. And I'm going to come to that in the second part of my talk when I talk about understanding AI, because we can think about ways in which AI can help even in those situations. But if you are lucky enough to have technology, then one of the real useful features that AI brings is the ability to adapt. So there are two key features of AI in the form of machine learning, and that is adaptivity and autonomy. So being able to adapt means that the machine learning AI can, for example, learn as a student interacts with that technology about that student. And it's already learnt in the past about millions of other students. And this learning enables that system to adapt very effectively to the individual needs of that student. And so we have some great pieces of software out there, such as N-Skills, which is a product produced by a company in the US called Alelo, which is an English language platform that you can work with through the browser, and you have a conversation with an on-screen character who helps you improve your language speaking and listening skills. And there are many systems, such as those built by Carnegie Learning or Century Tech or many others, that use the fact that AI can adapt to produce these adaptive platforms, which can be very useful, particularly when students have been out of school for a while. And as a teacher, one's unsure exactly what they've learnt, because the AI can very, very quickly identify where each student is and give them the individualized help that they need to help them catch up. It's certainly no replacement for human teachers at all, but it's a useful tool. And AI can also use this adaptivity to recommend different resources to be used with different groups of students, or recommend it directly to students or to a teacher, lecturer of students, and that can be useful. AI can also use information from sensors to be able to provide real-time feedback. So, for example, there are technologies such as those produced by Oya Labs for very, very, very young children, infants, where you have a sensor that tracks the noises that the infant is making as they're picking up language, how they're interacting with other members of the household, and then analyzes that data to provide information for parents via a smartphone app to help them improve their child's language development. And you can have systems that both sense and adapt, such as the SimSensei system that's used at the University of Southern California, where we have an on-screen character who acts as a counselor for students, is fed by a whole raft of learning from previous interactions with students about the kind of support students might need. And then in addition, there's real-time data coming in as the student is interacting with the on-screen character about their facial expressions, the speed, tone of their voice, what they're saying, to really enrich the information available to that on-screen character, available to the AI. And that can be analysed and added to the information the AI system already has from its historical knowledge of students who need counselling. So there's lots of ways that AI can help, particularly in these difficult times, as I say, to provide quick analysis of where students need help, to provide that support in that counselling example, and to try and help teachers be the most effective teachers they can, because after all, the human teacher is certainly still the most important resource in any education system. But now I want to talk about helping people to understand AI and why that's important, and why that can be important even in situations where the learners and teachers themselves may not have the technology that enables them to interact directly with AI systems. I completely agree that we have to ensure that everybody has connectivity, has devices, but that doesn't exclude also having very useful applications of AI. But we need to understand AI in a way that's contextualized for education and that sees it as a tool. So we have worked with a number of organisations over the past few years, from universities to school groups to professional trainers. And through the work we've done, we've developed a 7-step AI readiness framework. And this is explained in a book to be published in February by Routledge called AI for School Teachers. And it's part of an online course that will be launched at the same time in February 2022. And it's about contextualizing people's understanding of AI in the needs of an education ecosystem. So the 7 steps are about enthusing people about AI and why it could be useful. The second step is about finding a challenge, tailoring the way you're going to think about AI to a particular challenge you're facing. The third step is about identifying data that you have access to from which you could learn. The third step is about collecting more data to enrich the understanding that you can gain about the challenge you're facing. The fourth step is to apply some AI methods to the data that you have about your challenge. The sixth step is to learn. And the seventh step is about iterating, going through some of those steps again, so that you increase your understanding of AI and you also increase your understanding of the challenge that you're facing and how it might be addressed by AI. And the acronym for the framework, made from the beginning letters of each of those 7 steps, is ethical. And that's to remind us that everything we do when it comes to people's data and processing data must be done in an ethical way. But if we think of an example, if we think about some of the challenges that are facing education right now, and there are certainly many of them, we start to think about how AI can help us to understand these challenges more. And this should be the step that everybody goes through before they decide whether they're going to apply any AI in their school or their college to their students in their family. Because you need to really understand what your challenge is to know if AI could be useful in addressing that challenge. So this 7-step framework is to help people get to the stage where they understand enough about AI and they understand enough about the challenges they want to address to make the best choices when it comes to actually buying some AI or applying some AI. And as I've said, you will face multiple challenges. So we have a set of steps that help you to choose between the different challenges that you might be facing. And these embody the need to understand the difference between artificial and human intelligence, because that's the key to really leveraging what AI has to offer. That's the real key, because it's no use to build an AI system to do something that's better done by a human. And the main social interactions around teaching are definitely better done by a human. But we can certainly help that human with AI systems that can analyze and process vast amounts of information in split-second timing, and that can help that educator. So we unpack our challenge by thinking about whether it's a suitable challenge to be tackled by AI. And then we start to look for the data about our challenge that we're going to use to understand that challenge better and to understand what AI in the form of machine learning can do with that data. And we need to think about that data in the broadest possible way. And there's a lot of data existing in education institutions that we don't necessarily think about being useful when it comes to understanding learning. There could be data about temperature, about light in the buildings. There could be data about individual people, about, of course, their past performance in school. Could be about their movement. There could be some video. There could be online captured video from the online education that's happened during the pandemic. So there could be a lot of different data available to us. So for example, let's take a challenge, the challenge of trying to understand what happened when lessons went online at the start of the pandemic and stayed online for long periods for many students. How do we know what happened when we were dealing with this online and sometimes hybrid situation? What can we find out that can help us to understand about the different ways in which lessons were held and how those lessons did or did not provide a continuous and effective educational experience? So the kind of data that we might use for this could be historical data from tests, interviews from students at the school. It could be videos and tracking data from the online environment, particularly if we have anything like keystroke data as to how quickly students were pressing the keyboard or how they were using the mouse, or while they were learning online, for example. And if we have some video data, then we can start to look at where people were looking. We can look at eye tracking data as well. And that might be data that we have available to us from the online environment, from our historical data sources. And we can use that data to start to build a model of the ways in which learning happened across the thousands of lessons that happened when lessons went online. And we might decide to collect some additional data, some behavioural data from students and teachers and parents, for example, about their confidence levels, their anxieties when they were learning online. And we can use that to complement what we have already. But we take our data that we've got, our log data, our clicks, our historical data, and we clean it and tidy it, and we apply some machine learning tools to that data in order to try and identify common features across the multiple thousands of lessons that happened during the pandemic. And we build profiles that describe the most commonly found sorts of lessons. So we've got our 1,000 lessons, say, and we want to find out what were the common features across those 1,000 lessons. And this might, for example, be the amount of time that students were active. We could capture that. It might be what kind of technology they were using. It might be whether the students were learning only online or whether there were some students learning face-to-face. It might be whether the activities that took place were done in small groups or as the whole class. And we can gradually build these profiles up. And then we can compare those profiles to the data that we have from that behavioural survey where we're looking at confidence and anxiety. And that way we can start to look and say, okay, with this sort of lesson, we find that students were more anxious or teachers were more concerned that their students weren't as well engaged as they could have been. And in that way, we can start to build a picture of what were the most effective lessons when learning went online that helps us to make sure that we provide the most effective type of lesson whenever we have to use online technologies. Now, this is using AI to help us understand a challenge and to help us to understand what happened. It's not using a piece of AI for teaching and learning. It's using AI to analyze the data to help us understand more about that challenge, and in the process, more about AI. So that's a very brief outline of the kinds of AI readiness that I think all teachers and learners need to have. And in order to help that happen, and indeed to complement understanding about AI with actually how do I use digital technologies of any sort most effectively, we are hosting next spring a Make the Future Summit, and that is Educate Ventures, the spin-off company that I founded, and ISTE, the International Society for Technology and Education, based in the US. We're hosting a 2-day summit for groups of teachers, 3 from each of 50 schools, to have an in-person 2-day event where we help them to build the right strategy for making the most of technology in their schools. And then we engage them in an online community with ongoing support after that event to keep them going with developing that strategy for the most effective use of digital technologies, including AI, and build a community. And then as we have future events, new cohorts of educators join that community, and gradually we build a self-sustaining community of educators who have developed effective strategies for applying digital technologies and applying an understanding of AI to provide the most effective use of digital technology in their educational establishments, including the use of AI. And similarly, we're working at the moment with Google for a set of similar events for ministries and policymakers to help them build the most effective policies to ensure that technologies within their educational institutions are used most effectively, including AI. And I'm going to stop there and thank you very much for listening to me. I hope that's complemented the previous presentations and offered a slightly different perspective on AI and the need for very strategic applications of any form of digital technology, including AI. Thank you so much for listening to me and for inviting me.
Thank you very much, Professor Lakin, for this very nice presentation and for also introducing this aspect of artificial intelligence in the discussion, which I think is very, very important in an era where everything is changing. And as you mentioned, it's a new revolution. We would like to also to welcome now our previous speakers, and we will have like a short round of questions that we received from the audience. I think that the topics that you tackled are very much of relevance to our audience, and we're very happy that you bring a different perspective to this topic, all of you. So I will start with a question to Ulf and Javier, if I may. And this is a particular question about potentially some of the work that you have been doing to address the issues that you raised. Especially, for example, you raised the issue of the teacher training, the lack of teacher training, and potentially the hesitancy of the teachers when it comes to online teaching, especially during COVID. So I'm wondering, from an international and then from a more local perspective, could you give us a couple of examples of what you or you know that has been done in the field and could be presented as kind of a nice case studies here with the audience?
Yes. Can you hear me? Well, just we've been extremely concerned about drawing from what is being learned in the network. You know, we are in 60 countries with very different circumstances, but in the end, the problems are similar and the solutions too. So we have set up a lab to exchange experiences, and there is, maybe we could make this available to you, the lessons learned from the network and what the participants has told us as especially how to use frugal technology for the benefit of teaching. Because this is in the end what has been, I think, the main lesson. Because in most countries, not in Europe of course, but in most countries and in many communities within the European Union also, the real difficulty has been to use relatively small technology and put it to a good effect with emergency situations, as we were finding. And maybe Ulf can give you a specific example of Germany.
Yes, thank you. Just to copy what you just said, Xavier, I think that we are in the mode of experiment, all of us, and the exchanges between different countries within our network is quite intense at this point. So over the last 12 to 18 months, I would say, we are in a weekly exchange and see what lessons have worked out elsewhere in the world. In terms of like our experience is, well, one problem that we're seeing still is that the teacher training in Germany is usually by no means happening in the digital world. So even if we're trying to train teachers for this new challenge or this like the new mode, we're still doing it without using digital tools. And obviously it has changed a bit over the last 12 to 18 months since COVID-19 hit. But we are like the very experienced teacher trainers who are really familiar, not just with the tools, but also with the methodology changes that need to happen, are very rare. And what we're seeing in, for example, on Twitter, we have a Twitter group that's active all over Germany, and they're the trailblazers, you could say. So the very like heavy users of new technology and who are exchanging their experience and lessons learned. And this is a very interesting group that we try to connect with a lot, because we think they are really the ones that will kind of show us the way, and also make teachers a bit more curious and more brave, if you want to say so, to actually experiment and try out new things and then learn from it and see what has worked out and what hasn't. Still, it has to be that there is some, like in some schools, just a generation of teachers for whom it is a very big challenge, because schools have been so reluctant in Germany to invite new technologies into their day-to-day. And that's not just in teaching, also just the use of mobile phones has been forbidden all over Germany for the last decade. And so just imagine, when you are leaving maybe your schoolyard to secretly smoke elsewhere. Now, our kids nowadays, they're leaving the schoolyard to check their social media account, because they're not allowed to do that within the school. And that has been the reality before COVID hit. And now these students are saying, oh, for the last years, you told me never to use my mobile phone. And now suddenly you're telling me to use it every day. But back to your question, I think that to build strong networks of teachers who are actively experimenting, even though we know this might be the top 5% or 10%, could really lead and motivate more teachers to come into that mode of experiment, which to me is part of the solution. Instead of searching for the silver bullet solution and write the perfect book about how we should do it, I don't think that we should try to look into that direction.
Indeed, I think that's a very good example of what teachers, I guess, also all around the world, but especially in countries that lack this step of digitizing their education systems, kind of had to face during the COVID-19 pandemic. And we have received also a question from the audience for Professor Lakin, and especially regarding the artificial intelligence, of course, technology. And the question goes, how do you go about the challenge that any algorithm first has to be trained with particular data from a particular model before it can possibly provide any benefit in a school setting? So what are your thoughts about using particular data? And I guess also that goes with the ethical approach to the use of data and the collection of data overall.
That's absolutely true. And so if we think about the kinds of application of AI, so this is using AI for teaching and learning, then yes, you need to have had that machine learning algorithm trained on data in order to adapt to the students' needs. And that is a concern, because is that data representative of the type of students that are using the system in your class, if you're the teacher? Has that data, are your students' data being stored securely? Are they being processed securely? Are there any ethical risks in terms of the way the technology is operating? But more important than that, I think, when it comes to concerns about data and AI, is what is the AI doing and why is it doing? What's the imperative for using AI for a particular task? Because you can have the same algorithm and the same data, or almost the same algorithm and the same data, but if the imperative is different, the results can be different. So let me give you a specific example. If I, say, was collecting data about student performance and how quickly they were answering questions and maybe how anxious they were looking, say that's what I was interested in. Now, the imperative of the algorithm that's analyzing those pieces of that sort of data could be to provide more support to students when they're looking anxious. It could be to flag them to the teacher so that she or he can come in and help that student. That would be quite a positive thing. Alternatively, that same data set could be processed in a way that actually it was designed to provide less support to students who were deemed to be weaker and to provide more support to students who were deemed to be stronger and less anxious. They're two instances of the same data and almost the same algorithm, but the output is very, very different. So the why of why we're using AI is as important as the data. But one last point I'll make about your question, because I think it's a really interesting question, is one of the reasons I believe so strongly in the AI readiness approach before you decide about AI is that that's about you as an educator or a leader understanding what AI is doing can do with your data. And that's your data. And you're not training an algorithm because you're using different types of machine learning techniques in that instance to learn about your data. So it's a way of trying to help people understand much more about the relationship between data and AI, so that when they are making a decision about applying AI, buying AI, they're much, much better able to ask the important questions to the supplier of that AI to make sure that it's going to do what they want it to do. And they're much better able to decide what kind of AI is the sort of AI they want. So I think your question is really important, and it's something that we need people to understand much more about, for sure, if we're really going to have AI used in an effective way for everybody in education.
Indeed. And I think it's very important, as you mentioned, understanding what AI is, especially in this kind of era where we are starting to use it more and more, is very important. And we have a follow-up question related to the framework that you presented and you have developed. Participants are asking whether this framework is intended for learning AI applied also beyond the school, and for example, real life scenarios about students, or is it more particular to formal education kind of settings?
It is applicable to informal situations as well. The framework is applicable to any situation. The book, which is called AI for School Teachers, which comes out in February, which talks about the framework and its application for school teachers, is a way of contextualizing that framework in the school environment. But it would still be useful for a parent to read or for somebody involved in informal education. But the reason I make this point so strongly is that I think AI is something that needs to be understood by most of us in a very contextual way. So you might have AI for lawyers and you might have AI for engineers, because actually we as non-technical, this is about non-technical understanding of AI, to understand what it can do, but not about building the algorithm. I think most of us need that explanation in quite a grounded way. So it's about trying to help people understand AI in a very grounded way. So the framework's applicable everywhere, but it's the grounding that's important. I hope that helps to answer that question.
I think so, and I think that this also is very particular to each kind of setting that we are discussing. And as you mentioned, it's really to understand that AI is not it's not as it's used like a catch for all phrase, but it also applies to specific settings. And now we have indeed. We now have a last question to Ulf and Javier, and then I will give a more kind of overall question to everybody before we close. So the question to Ulf and Javier is, do you think that teachers also need more news literacy skills as well to teach kids how to identify facts from fakes online? And I think this is also very much related to artificial intelligence tools that we develop to identify this. So what is your kind of thinking with related to fake news and fact checking?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a very simple answer. The answer is absolutely yes. This is absolutely critical, and there's a very simple reason for that. I think we have very, very dramatic statistics as to how many students are unable to make a very simple distinction between a fact and an opinion, which is the very basis to be able then to be a critical citizen that looks at what is being thrown at him or her with a sense of distinction and criticism. So it is one of the neglected skills because it doesn't fit into a traditional curriculum. It's not geography, it's not history, but understanding how information works and making a clear distinction between facts and opinion. This very simple skill is essential and is not there enough. And students don't have it. And many teachers don't have the capacity to teach it or the knowledge to teach it. So I would say, yes, this should be definitely a priority, alongside with a minimum of numeracy and statistical skills. Being able to function with basic statistics is the equivalent of the 21st century of being able to read and write in the previous century. So we have to, I mean, as Rose was saying, you don't have a need for most people to understand the mechanics of computer programming or how artificial intelligence actually works in practice. But you have to understand what it means. And this is really an essential skill for any kind of education, primary, secondary, and higher education.
Yeah, just to build on that, I would also add that usually in most of the countries, schools have different goals, if you want to say so. And one obviously is that schools should prepare for a successful educational career. So you should be able to finish your educational career at the end of the day and enter the labor market. But then a second goal always is to help students develop a certain level of independence. You should be captain of your ship. You should be able to lead your life independently. And the third goal usually is active citizenship. So we want to prepare the next generation to be active citizens. And now these last goals especially are hard. I mean, how can you lead an independent life if you've never learned to actually sort information and to know which kind of information you want to put more trust in than in others, as well as what Professor Lukin was saying. If you don't, in the future, if you don't know anything about artificial intelligence and big data, it will be very difficult to lead an independent life because you don't know what is more or less happening to you while you interact in society or while you engage in social media. So I do think that we need to re-establish in a certain way what it means, what schools need to provide to make sure that students leave school as an independent social being and also as an active citizen.
Thank you very much. I think this is a very, very good, presentation of what is needed and why also literacy, media literacy is very important today. And I would like to finish this very nice kind of round of questions with a question to all three of you. What would be one advice that you would give to the policymakers that will also, for example, come to the next session of today's event with regards to digital education and especially with in the aspects of inclusion? What would be the one advice, one tip that would give to them? Start with you.
I would say, all the experience of Teach for All tells me something very simple. Policymakers should do more on teacher induction. We throw most young teachers into a classroom with very, very little understanding of how to deal with it. In many education systems, teacher academies tell about Piaget and many theoretical things, but not so much about how to actually be able to empathize and actually deal with the classroom. That applies to digital technology, it applies to inclusion, it applies to everything. So my very simple word would be, since there's no education system that is better than the quality of its teachers, make sure that you actually do support teachers when they get in and once they are there. And that is a general message of it for policymakers. It applies extremely well to technology as it applies to anything else.
Shall I go next, or Wolf? I'll go next, and that'll be. I actually, building on what Xavier said, I think I would say community is so important. We need to see any educational institution, any educator as part of an ecosystem, and that ecosystem is a community. And ecosystems are resilient when they're balanced. And so it's really trying to build communities of educators and parents and school leaders and policymakers who can work together to support each other. The research that we did during the pandemic demonstrated so clearly that people who felt supported, and the support was mainly coming from family, friends, colleagues, were much more resilient and much more able to feel confident about using technology and delivering education during the pandemic. So I think I would absolutely agree with Xavier. It's got to be supporting teachers. And I think a community-based approach to helping to put that support into place can be really helpful, which is why we're trying to do that community building around developing strategies in institutions, where you used to have a physical meeting and then a virtual community built from that physical meeting.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Ulf?
Yes, I can echo that. And I would add, I think that for the new generation of teachers who's coming in and who's now joining the workforce, to come up with, say, a European or international network of teachers, it would even add to the job satisfaction for those teachers. There's a hunger to interact with other teachers elsewhere in Europe or in the world. And I think it is time for a European or otherwise international teacher training academy that will also strengthen those strong teachers who are already there and help them to become multipliers, who then help the education systems to become more of a learning system, not just for the students, but also for the teacher workforce.
Thank you very much all for your inputs and for your speeches today. It was a very, very big pleasure to have you with us, an honor that you came and presented your ideas and your views. And I think your inputs were very interesting for our audience. Thank you very much. And I wish you a very, very good day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
So before we move on with the next part of our today's agenda, we'll take a short break. And in the meantime, we would like to invite you to check out and discover the latest publications of European Schoolnet in the delegates bag. For example, we have there one on the future of schools beyond COVID-19, and another one that very much relates to the blended learning guidelines adopted by the Council of Education Ministers on blended learning in teacher education and training. We see you all back at 11:45 Central European Time. Welcome back, everybody, to Eminent 2021, when we're focusing this year on digital education and inclusion. Our speakers already have tackled the issue quite a lot, and we hope that you're following the discussion also on our social media with the hashtag Eminent 2021. We're now moving on with our first panel discussion, which will revolve around the ways in which digital education and inclusion policies can be central in countries' educational reforms. European Schoolnet's Development and Advocacy Manager, Tommaso Dalla Vecchia, is coordinating this discussion. So I let you, Tommaso, to present our speakers, and I wish you a fruitful discussion.
Thank you, Konstantinos, for welcoming us so warmly on stage today. And I'm very pleased to be with you, and good morning to everyone who is following us online. How and for which purpose inclusion and digital education should be at the center of future policy education reform? This is the topic that we will be addressing during this roundtable discussion. We understand that this topic is as ambitious and complex as it is necessary, so we're very pleased to start this discussion with distinguished guests today. This is the question we will be asking ourselves during the roundtable discussion, and we will have the pleasure to have the perspectives of 3 different countries and their respective ministries of education. With us today, we have Tomislav Paljak, State Secretary at the Croatian Ministry of Science and Education. Mr. Paljak covered in the past several political roles and also worked as teacher and primary school headmaster. So he definitely gained relevant experience and knowledge about education, and more specifically about inclusion and leadership. So welcome, Mr. Paljak. We will have today with us also Professor João Costa, Deputy Minister and Secretary of State for Education in Portugal. Professor Costa is also chair of TALIS, the OECD Teaching and Learning International Survey, and acted as Secretary of State for Education during the 21st government. And last but not least, we have also the honor to have with us Dr. Justine Caruana, the Maltese Minister for Education. During her 18 years in Parliament, Dr. Caruana chaired the Permanent Committee for Gozo Affairs, as well as for the consideration of bills, and was previously a member of the Public Accounts Committee, Social Affairs Committee, and the Family Affairs Committee. A warm welcome to the 3 of you, and thank you again for joining us today. With our speakers and their diverse lenses and experiences, we will deep dive into how inclusion is defined and pursued in relation more specifically to digital education, how the pandemic and emergency remote teaching have brought about new challenges to the inclusion of all students, and what novel measures have been undertaken by policymakers, government, other stakeholders to make sure that schools could cope with the period and with the future planning that also is stemming from this crisis. But let's not wait any longer, and let's start this first roundtable taking a sort of journey throughout 3 different countries, 3 different models, and definitely different experiences that we had today. We have heard from our keynote speakers several important elements about also how digital education and inclusion can be already embedded and brought holistically to the education sector. But now we will see really practical examples, practical stories from countries, and we will see also how these general principles, the theory also, is being embedded in different contexts. So I would like to give the floor, first of all, to State Secretary Paljak, to whom I would ask kindly to introduce to our audience what specific inclusion challenges and or opportunities do you think are related to digital education, either in emergency settings, but also in more systemic scenarios? And how have been your Ministry of Education addressing the additional risks of exclusion that certainly affected students during this period of crisis? So I leave you the microphone, Mr. Paljak, and thanks again for joining us.
Thank you very much. So, circumstances regarding pandemic have showed us that there is more than ever necessary to pay attention that education is available for all students. We can all conclude that the COVID-19 crisis was a turning point for the use of technology in education. In March last year, almost overnight, we needed to organize distance teaching instead of teaching in the classrooms, which was till then vastly unknown in all schools. It was necessary to assure access to remote classes for all students so that they could continue their education and that they could finish the school year with success. Croatia had luck since we had initiated digital transformation of education before pandemic, mostly through the comprehensive curricular reform and through Project eSchools. And our Project eSchools in its pilot phase was in 2020 awarded by the European Commission as the best project in the category inclusive growth, skills and education for digital Europe, drawing the importance of a holistic approach to the application of modern technology, digital content and support to providing equal opportunities for the education of all students. In the implementation of the digitalization, the priority of the ministry was to ensure digital independence of teachers, which meant ensuring that teachers have laptops and that classrooms were equipped. Therefore, in 2019, around 1,200 laptops were procured for educational experts at schools and 26,000 laptops for teachers. After that, we have focused on equipping students with devices. The plan was to digitalize schools with adjustment being made regarding the age of students. This simply the students in lower grades from 6 to 10 years of age, who still need to develop graphomotoric skills, should use tablets only in activities such as group work. So for 5 tablets have been provided in each class. In higher grades, when students attend subject classes from 11 to 15 years of age, each student was given a tablet in order to encourage the use of digital content and materials and provide students with an opportunity to learn how to use the digital tools and in a responsible way. Tablets have been both for all students of primary schools, approximately 190,000. The challenge was to provide all students with internet access at home, enabling them to access digital content. Mobile network operators joined the initiative by providing all students who have received tablets the SIM cards to enable free access to digital educational content. Secondary schools received €500,000 from the ministry to procure tablets for socioeconomically disadvantaged students, that is for those for which the school believes not to have computers or internet access at home. During distance learning preparation, principals were told of the parents' right to file a request to lend a device with internet access, and it was the principal's task to gather this request and send them to the ministry, which provided schools with funds for device procurement. Throughout the distance learning period, the ministry authorized a fund for the procurement of additional 300 tablets. Furthermore, some schools with a majority of Roma students used the allocated funds by the ministry to equip Roma assistants with portable IT equipment, laptops, printers, extra amounts of paper and toners, allowing them to help Roma students in Roma communities to participate in distance learning. UNICEF has also provided help for Roma students, ensuring 100 tablets. Within the curricular reform project in December 2020, education centers and schools education students with special educational needs received additional €500,000 for school equipment. Procurement of this equipment provided additional infrastructure support for the implementation of distance learning. Also, the ministry allowed centers to decide on equipment distribution among students since they are most familiar with students' needs and possibilities. This made it easier for them to set up a system and establish communication. For all students requiring assistive technologies, including the visual challenge, the ministry provided and financed such technology. Strong emphasis was put on developing teachers' digital competences and facilitating their work in a virtual environment. Teacher training for curricular reform was launched online in 2018 via virtual classrooms on the Moodle platform, Lumen. This enabled continuous professional development and online cooperation for teachers. In almost 2 years, more than 50,000 teachers participated in such trainings. This was the key experience that later enabled teachers to establish virtual classrooms and communication with students and other teachers without difficulty. This training and support was provided by teams of mentors established in 2017 and who have continuously been preparing and organizing training and supports as part of the educational reform. All of this has contributed to the swift and effective distance learning implementation in the context of the COVID-19 crisis. The result of all this was that the remote teaching was introduced very quickly. Special attention was given to every student and that every student has the internet connection. Special attention was also given to students in lower grades from 6 to 10 years of age who are unable to use that equipment on its own, and for them we have organized teaching via the state television. For minority groups of students, teaching was organized in their mother tongue. The ministry gave its best that digital divide among students stay on its lowest possible level to that we don't have any groups of students which have problems accessing the remote teaching. Inclusion of every student in education is an important topic, not only pandemic, but all the time. The digital education action plan is also putting the strong focus on quality and inclusion. The state and schools must always have in mind the some group of students need more support and must be at disposal for those groups and to allow them access to digital educational materials and digital teaching in general. Despite the fact that remote teaching was introduced in the time of crisis, we have realized that the digitalization in education and the remote teaching have many opportunities for the future education, for example, to increase the access to education for students who due to the illness are placed in hospitals or homes, talented students who are additionally engaged in sports, art or STEM activities, students in isolated places, island or rural areas, and many others. Classroom teaching can be broadcast via video conference, and students can be actively involved via video call, voice or write communication. Online communication and collaboration are key skills in modern work environment. Therefore, it is important to develop those skills and well as competences for appropriate, responsible, and safe use of ICT in education, work, or private life. Thank you.
Thank you, State Secretary, for this comprehensive overview. And it's also interesting and definitely very relevant to see how really the crisis possibly acted and served as a catalyst of a process that already started, that was already very well inscribed in Croatian policies and measures and reform path, really. So I assume that this will be the same in other countries as well. And I would like now to go to Portugal and to hear from Professor Costa about actually the plans and the context that you have experienced in Portugal during the pandemic, but also before and after, for what concern the inclusion of all students in high quality and relevant education, and how you've tried to pursue that also, and especially in connection with digital education. And giving you the mic, Professor Costa, also thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you very much, and thank you for putting up this meeting. I'd like to greet the other members of this panel, and thank you, Tommaso, for the initiative and for the kind invitation. Well, the first thing I'd like to say is that one of the first challenges that we were faced with, and that sometimes we do not mention, is that we had to be very much aware of the difference between what we could call digital education as the topic of this meeting, and emergency remote teaching. And this is very important, because sometimes we might think that one and the other are the same, but they aren't. And when we're talking about the emergency remote teaching, we were all faced with no time to prepare, the unexpectedness of all this, to be aware that digital education does not replace face-to-face education. Actually, what we want is to have digital education in the classroom with the teachers and the students present, and to be aware that the goal of digital education is not to replace the classroom. We had some major concerns during the pandemic, like all other countries. And I often say that the education systems in general were put under a microscope, a big microscope. The microscope of the acceleration of the need for digital skills, the fact that inequity was immensely augmented. We became more aware of the role of social emotional skills, about the role of the social function of schools. There were students that only have social protection because they go to school. We were dealing with levels of stress, levels of anxiety, students whose parents were in layoff, students whose parents lost their jobs, students who did not know how to relate with their teachers and their peers at a distance. And we also became very much aware of the role of literacy, the need to develop new literacies for health, for media literacy, information literacy, because we were all exposed to an avalanche of fake news regarding the pandemic itself. We had, when we passed all of a sudden to remote learning, we had some immediate concerns. One was the protection of children at risk. The other one was to provide meals to those children who only eat at school when they go to school, to provide therapies to children who need them, and therapies, most of them could not be replaced by any kind of remote assistance, and especially to reach out to children who were not connected. And these were the topics that guided our immediate action in March, April 2020, because we were from the very beginning, as I mentioned before, very much aware of the augmented inequity. The most visible face of this was the lack of access to equipment or connectivity by many students, by many families. As in many other countries, this was very hard to solve in a context of emergency, because there was, buying 1 million computers is not something that you do from one day to another. There was lack of components, and the industry was not responding at the level we all wanted. But also, in a less visible way, we developed this awareness that you may have your computer, you may have your connectivity, but this does not ensure that you are connected and that you are fully participating in the educational activities. So this happens in cases in which there is a computer, there is a good internet connection, but there is no parental support, there is no guidance at home, and the pandemic brought us much higher dependence of students on their families. And we know in Portugal and in other countries that the socioeconomic status, the condition, the qualification of the parents is the main predictor of underachievement, of low achievement, and for this reason, this became more relevant, because there were those students who could, ask their parents to clarify some doubts. Others didn't have this option. We had to find some emergency solutions immediately during the first lockout. As I mentioned before, the provision of meals, the partnerships with the local organizations, NGOs, and others to make sure that we were able to connect with those students that were not immediately equipped. So there was this priority on keeping in touch, keeping contact. We developed a way to broadcast classes on TV, on open TV. For this, we developed over 3,000 thematic blocks for all school years and all subjects. We also developed instruments to assess and screen difficulties with the diagnosis study and the reintroduction of low-stakes assessment to detect main difficulties. And these were guidelines for our recovery plan that we are implementing now. And also the big focus from the very beginning was to support schools with the proximity meetings with the headmasters, with guidelines for teaching, capacity building and remote learning, on how to deal with the inequity issues, how to use the platforms, guidelines on cybersecurity, guidelines on the psychological support for parents, students, and teachers, with the support of board psychologists, with the availability of open digital resources, and we had the good complicity of our publishing houses to provide access to online platforms in free access. And we kept schools open for children of what we call the essential professionals, so health services and other professionals that were essential to keep the country function. After these first months of the pandemic, we made sure that schools also remained open for all children at risk and for all those for whom remote learning proved ineffective. And so what I'm stating here is not so much what was the digital education response, but in general, what were the biggest challenge and big concerns and the main measures to guarantee that all children were connected and all children were protected, because this had to be our first focus and our first concern. And I will leave other measures for the other rounds.
Thank you, Professor Costa. It's a very interesting description of what happened in the country, and you touched upon also other elements that weren't touched upon before, but still that we keep, of course, hearing about the importance of social emotional learning and interaction and connection and human really interaction between students, among students, and between students, teachers, and as well as family, which was a bit also the new topic that was addressed during the pandemic. Appreciate particularly the image of the microscope under which maybe we can look at the topic of inclusion, which certainly is not a novel area for improvement for all countries, but really is now an area where we have learned possibly more in relation also to digital education throughout the different lockdowns. So we'll definitely go more in details about that later on. And meanwhile, I would also like, of course, to give the floor and the microphone to Minister Caruana to understand a bit better also what was the situation and what is the situation in Malta, how you addressed these additional challenges that were posed to any administration, any ministry, and how you see really possibly the connection between digital education and inclusion and how they could be developed together. Thank you once again for being with us as well.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and I think this discussion is a very timely one and a very important one, because while we always say that digital competence is one of the key competencies alongside with literacy and numeracy needed in all walks of life, there is greater demand for more advanced competencies in informatics, especially within the context of the pandemic and the changes that we have to do in a very, very rapid way, I have to say. And tangible actions are to be taken for basic digital competencies from early years to those who lag behind, while pushing forward towards more advanced computing education to corroborate a digital smart and resilient economy as recommended by the Recovery Plan for Europe and Malta's Recovery and Resilience Plan. And as I highlighted earlier, the outbreak of COVID challenged and interrupted the normality of everybody, especially students in their educational journey and educators alike. And this, however, provided an opportunity to test ourselves, but also has accelerated the use of digital technology for learning and also the upskilling of our educators regarding online pedagogy, and it brought digital technologies opportunities to the fore. And in fact, Malta's economic vision for the next decade includes education as one of its 5 pillars that underscore its successful attainment, and it is considered crucial in equipping the future workforce with skills to meet the demand of the digital economy. And we have to say that we are preparing our education sector to gear up towards the emerging technologies such as the extended reality, artificial intelligence, learning analytics, virtual worlds, online virtual environments, and these can provide also new modes of learning through various virtual and hybrid learning environments, which we started using already in Malta. As was hinted earlier, artificial intelligence is now part of our lives. It is already being used in our educational services and is part of our curriculum design. And there is no doubt that education can benefit from AI to address the current challenges in teaching, learning, and learner success. And this, in fact, was discussed last week during the Council of Ministers meeting in Brussels, where, yes, we addressed the AI issues, how it can benefit, how it can complement the educator's experience in class, but we also raised concerns about the other side of AI, which is cybersecurity. And there was an informal consensus that we need to discuss more so that we see the benefits, but we also counteract the challenges that may be provided as we go along. For sure, the integration of applied digital skills in education and training systems needs to start from a young age, and that's what we are doing in Malta. And this to ensure the sustainable investment in human capital and to transform the challenges by the digital transition into opportunities. And in this regard, Malta has always been at the forefront in the promotion of learner-centered pedagogies enhanced with the use of digital learning technologies, and we have been working on the inclusion of digital competence since 2014, and we even launched the National Digital Strategy 2014-2020, placing particular emphasis on education, citizens, and the proposal of enhancing and extending the intensity of ICT in our curricula, which harnesses the potential of citizens, upskilling, reskilling within the vulnerable groups, and also to increase female participation in ICT industry. I have to mention a very important initiative which was rolled out in 2016, which is the One Tablet Per Child project under the European Social Fund, which aimed to provide a tablet for every child in primary school. And this enhanced our endeavors towards digital education and digital learning. Now we are moving on to the second stage, where we'll be providing the one tablet per child to the secondary school students. And this initiative was also rolled out to our educators, which together with the one tablet, we also furnish them with all the digital material. In fact, between 2016 and 2018, we had the project rolled out to 15,000 devices. And parallel to this, we had also the launch of the National E-Skills Strategy to reinforce the drive towards a digital environment, future technology, growth, IT teaching, and guidance also for educators, funding of sustainable initiatives, enhancing curricular design, professional development, assessing digital competence and upskilling of industry, increasing citizens' engagement in digital technology, and we also had the National Artificial Intelligence Strategy, which focuses on the strategic plans to achieve the competitive advantage in the global economy through the creation of a solid AI ecosystem, which starts even from schools. The government then has supported educators and schools with diverse digital platforms, resources, and training as an extension of their classroom environment. And we are investing in future classrooms of the European Schoolnet. In fact, I just visited one of them, and it is a very interesting concept because it enables a very versatile way of teaching, depending on, obviously, the methodology and pedagogical skills of our educators, but it is a very flexible and innovative way of teaching so that we ensure that no student is left behind. And we have a very personalized approach towards the pedagogical aspect of our students. Towards the digital enablement of our learners and educators and parents alike, we provided also training opportunities. And apart from that, we created and we built safe spaces for educational learning throughout a very strong collaboration. And also we have a way to assess the e-skills needs. There is also a strategy going on and a census going on to establish the e-skills required for our future economic vision. And this has been accelerated further by the pandemic. Also, we have, because of the pandemic, we had to assist further our students to ensure that the digital divide is not enhanced and strengthened. So we invested in virtual schools, we invested in pre-recorded lessons which are available to students free of charge and on demand. We gave free internet to our students, and we even gave them free laptops and tablets. And this package was increased and enhanced when vulnerable students were concerned. We are now launching the second national strategy for digital education so that we promote the digital transformation into the educational system across all levels, be it primary, secondary, tertiary, and post, because we want the acquisition of the required digital competencies which are indispensable for the next generation digital learning communities. I think that the pandemic brought about challenges, yes, but there are a lot of opportunities, and it has also tested our system. I have to say that as a small country, we managed to keep our schools open despite the challenges. We had to invest heavily in various measures, and we only closed our schools for a few days. And I have to say that our students, they registered also progress in their academic advancement, but obviously there were other impacts, especially with regards to mental health, with regards to the social and emotional side. And we therefore have to stress and continue investing so that even through the digital agenda, we combat exclusion and we promote inclusion and qualitative education, but more than that, to ensure that no student is left behind.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Minister Caruana. I think really the overview that you provided gives us an understanding of also how different stakeholders, different areas, different sectors were involved in these national plans and in the provision of digital competencies that you deem necessary. And it gives us also the depth of how we can conceptualize digital education, which is not only technology-enhanced type of teaching and learning, but also learning about the digital world that surrounds us from very different perspectives, and also in terms of inclusion and equitable access to education. The measures that you set in place were definitely an inspiration for the discussion that will follow. I take the chance also to remind the audience, in case they would like to ask a question to our guests, to write them in the chat. And nevertheless, in the meanwhile, I'll be starting asking you some questions to inform the conversation. And if you would like, of course, to also comment on each other's statements, please do so very, very openly. I would start with State Secretary Paljak, who earlier described to us very comprehensively the structures and the measures put in place at the state level because of the pandemic, especially, but also in the previous and in the future, in the further looking plans. Now I would like to ask you about more on the inclusion side, how a state, how a member state, how a government can make sure that digital education really involves all students, doesn't leave anybody behind. In a way, we see the transition to digital education as a transformation process, as an acceleration process to a certain extent. So how do we make sure that nobody is left behind in the policies that we are designing for the future, based on what we learn also from the current experience?
Yes, in creating educational policies, it is crucial to gather all actors in education together for the same goal. We need to bring at the same table educational agencies, universities, institutes, and non-governmental organizations, as well as the private sector, social partners, and civil society, which operate in the field of education. Each respective organization can give its contributions so that students receive quality and appropriate education in this digital time. From the development of quality digital educational materials and operating guidelines for teaching students with special educational needs to the initial education of the future teachers and continuous professional development of teachers. Actually, the pandemic showed us that the communication with parents is of great importance. During the lockdown, parents had more responsibilities related to the education of their children. Greater engagement was needed for helping their children with learning, helping with homework, or preparing for the examinations. Furthermore, we have seen how important communication between schools and parents was. In that process, it was important to have in mind the involvement of all students in teaching, because we are aware that our parents are not capable of giving excessive help to their children because of their work obligations or because of their own level of education, of course. There was emphasis on schools to recognize to which student they have to give more attention so that every student can successfully achieve the learning outcomes.
Thank you, Mr. Paljak. That was very, very clear. I would like now to maybe reflect on something that was mentioned by Xavier Prat-Monet earlier, who started his presentation mentioning how long time ago his organization tried to leverage ICT for inclusion. So thinking that there might be a link actually between the two, between digital education and inclusion. And I would like to ask Secretary of State Costa about his vision and understanding of this relationship between these two elements, and whether you think also that there might be some good practices or elements that we need to keep in mind for making sure that while we invest in digital education, we invest also in making sure that this acceleration and this improvement in the way we teach and learn is really of access to anyone.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think that's really an important issue. We know, on very general terms, we know that if a citizen is not equipped with digital competencies these days, he will be excluded. Some fundamental rights that we have right now can only be fulfilled if we know how to navigate in the world of information, and also if we have the means to be able to use some technologies, and this is true for children and youngsters in preparing the future. It's also very important in terms of lifelong learning. We know that the work, the structure of work is changing very rapidly. So the less we invest on adult education in this area, the more we promote the exclusion. And so this is in very general terms. In more specific terms, digital education brings us new challenges, and I think that if we are not aware these specific challenges, we maybe fail in the goal of promoting more inclusion. And this have to do with promoting information literacy. We are navigating in these avalanches of information, so we need to equip students with the ability to not swallow everything that appears on your screen as if it was the truth, to be able to develop critical thinking, to evaluate sources, detection of fake information, how to differentiate facts from opinions, how to contrast between different sources of information, to know that we are no longer only producers of contents, or not only consumers of contents, but we are producer of contents. So there are many ethical issues that if you're not capable of mastering, you will be a new focus of exclusion, because you don't know how to communicate. You may become a radical promoter of new ways of segregation. So there's a whole agenda on ethics related with digital education, and also things that have to do with the control of our emotions. In particular, when we think of artificial intelligence, we become very much aware that all of a sudden, while we navigate in platforms for music, for film, and so on, we get this study of our emotional profile, and this has advantages and disadvantages. And while we can, since we are more and more aware of the role of social emotional skills in education, this can be a good thing, but can also be a source of alienation, and alienation is always a source for exclusion. And so I would say that when we talk about equity, we know that the digital education can be also a very precious tool to detect difficulties, impairments, to prone diversification of strategies. But in general, without ever forgetting that education is about human relations, it's about growing together. And so if we want to have a digital education fostering inclusion, we have to be able to separate what is a tool and what is the means. That is to say that digital is a tool that can be used for more inclusion, and it's not a goal in the same way that the promotion of equity is a goal in education.
Thank you very much. And indeed, the distinction between the means and ends is very, very timely and very important for the conversation we are having. And definitely we don't need something that looks more like digital segregation or exclusion of either young people, but also adults and elderly in this digital shift and transformation we are trying to develop all together. And therefore, I would love to hear also Minister Caruana's views on this topic, as she has also been so much involved in different policies, including, for instance, as you mentioned just before, also the engagement of more women in high-tech sector and professions and so on. So the question for you as well, Mr. Minister Caruana, is what really are the measures to make sure that we are not promoting a digital segregation, but instead a digital education comes with a by design inscribed inclusion elements that make sure that everybody can benefit from it?
Well, let me start with an important point that you raised, not necessarily connected with the topic today of digital education, but with regards to female participation in the employment market. We launched a very innovative scheme, which is the free childcare scheme for everybody, for every child in Malta. And this was even applauded by Commissioner Maria Gabriel, who was in Malta recently, who declared that with regards to children participation, children entitlement in a school environment, I mean, we rank first amongst the European Union. And this obviously paves the way for more schemes, for more innovative practices, so that we can enhance the female participation in the labour market, and also in the context and in the field of the digitalization agenda. As you were saying, we cannot afford to have a digital divide or the strengthening of digital divide, especially in the context and the reality of the pandemic. We have to work the other way around. We have to provide more opportunities to empowerment. And when we have a look at the statistics at the DESI report 2020, it states that the performance on basic digital skills, which in the EU average is 56% of the population having at least basic digital skills, and 58% that have at least basic software skills. This means, and it's very clear, I mean, these figures are very clear, that we need to work more in order to increase those numbers. And it means that we do have the digital divide at EU level, and we have to work at national level to increase those numbers. And this entails a mind shift. So apart from training our students, it has to be a lifelong process. So it's not that just the children in schools. It's not just those who want to upskill or reskill. It has to be an agenda throughout. It has to be a digitalization agenda starting from schools, yes, but spreading throughout society. And we have to have an outlook how best to employ flexibility so that we ensure that these skills are imparted to each and everybody, so that we give rather the opportunity for everyone to succeed. And to reach that goal, we have to have tailor-made initiatives, and we need to have programs. So first and foremost, we need to make digital education accessible from all, and this is also from the financial aspect by offering free digital education. And we have to ensure that we have an educational system that does not rely only on digital education. And in conjunction with that, in parallel, we have to train our educators on various digital resources and different functions available. And to train, we need to give training to learners to be equipped with the digital skills to make effective use of the digital education. And that will enable the different strata of society to have access to digital education, so that we build cohesion rather than fostering divide. And I think that this is a very important concept which we need to push, not only at policy level, but even at community level, because we need to encourage even the communities, the local councils, to ensure that they deliver digital education, especially to adults, now that there is more reliance on technology, now that we have more services online, also in view of the pandemic. We have to ensure that everybody is equipped to access the services. And the pandemic, if anything, has made us rely more on technology. It helped us to keep connected, not physically, but virtually. So we have to tap on the opportunities that this agenda has provided. We have the digital agenda, it's there, but we have to ensure that people have access to it. They know how to use it. They obviously rely on it, but they would need to be equipped with the knowledge and know-how and the means to access it as well. And this is a very important subject, which this forum today, I think, is very important that we focus on this. And I am glad that the other panelists are on the same lines, and we are discussing digital education, digitalization, but also inclusion, and inclusion for everybody.
Thank you very much, Minister. That was very clear, and definitely you also brought forward interesting points, including the fact that definitely we are more reliant on technology and also on the community that surrounds us, and using that as an excuse, as a hook somehow. I would like to go back to Mr. Paljak and ask you another question about the different stakeholders that actually can contribute to make digital education more inclusive. You mentioned before that definitely other sectors were involved in the process that you put in place. I would like you to deepen a bit, possibly, whether the crisis in a way helped you, the different actors and sectors in your countries, work together under different bases. I'm thinking about possibly collaboration between the EdTech sector and the Ministry of Education, or between parents, the community, the non-formal education network and organization, and the students themselves, and the role of the students in such dynamic.
Yes, thank you. We live in a digital society, and digital transformation has a great impact on our educational system. Very fast development of digital tools and artificial intelligence put many challenges in front of parents and society. Often schools and parents need to ensure additional financial resources for IT equipment. Quality digital educational materials must be carefully and professionally prepared, and also great attention must be dedicated to the adjustment for the IT equipment and the digital educational materials for students with special needs and special educational needs. Yes. The Ministry of Science and Education in Croatia is introducing digital educational materials in educational system intensively. Through Project eSchools and the comprehensive curricular reform, we were collaborating with educational agencies, universities, and other organizations. As early as 2017, we started a project of incorporating digital literacy into various subject and after-school programs by using microcomputers in cooperation with the Institute for the Development and Youth Innovation. The Croatian Academic and Research Network acquired 45,000 microcomputers for sixth grade primary school students with the aim of developing students' digital competences. So fostering creativity, innovation, and interdisciplinary approach to the use of information technologies. Also, I would like to mention the Croatian Association for Artificial Intelligence, which gets more than 170 members, consisting of the Croatian artificial intelligence enterprises, startups, scale-ups, universities, and artificial intelligence states, with a view to connecting leading enterprises and startups in the field of artificial intelligence in Croatia. The agency and university in Zagreb have translated more elements of artificial intelligence for schools and also for wider population. In 2020, Croatia was one of 5 countries where the course elements of artificial intelligence was displayed. This more attended more than 27,000 people in Croatia, many of them from business world of education. More was introduced also in schools as artificial intelligence school challenge and 700 students from 81 schools successfully finished the course. Many people from business and innovation world promoted the course element of artificial intelligence, among which innovator Mate Rimac and also the Prime Minister. In education, this course was introduced in the form of big artificial intelligence school challenge, and many schools took the challenge. Another initiative which I could mention is Project School in Future, in which 63 schools took part. In that project, more than 1,000 students from teams in which they developed their solution for achieving UN Sustainable Development Goal using artificial intelligence tools. The project will continue to include more schools and more students in these initiatives. Raising the digital skills of the population from an early age is one of Croatia's priorities. I would also like to mention the initiative EU Code Week. In 2020, Croatia was among the top 10 countries in the number of activities organized, reaching almost 36,000 participants. 46% of whom were women. From the all mentioned initiatives, it's clear that for digital transformation, synergy of many actors is needed to provide inclusive education in the digital era for all students. Based on this experience, the Republic of Croatia plans to cooperate with all these organizations in future and also work on widening that cooperation.
Thank you for your answer, State Secretary. I think you've recalled and you've brought up an interesting point for reflection, including the fact that really the non-formal education sector and many actors that are not necessarily the one in charge for compulsory education can really make the change and allow really the community to be more resilient, as we hear often in connection with the pandemic. And even though resilience is definitely a buzzword, in a sense, it describes well the capacity of the community to react to a crisis situation and put in place some of the elements that could be also really supportive of the change and of a new normality that I would say would await us. And then staying on the same wavelength, I would like to go back to then Secretary of State Costa to actually ask you about what your vision is about all these measures that have been taken for reacting to a situation that definitely wasn't easy, to make sure that all the students would access high quality and digital education. And more specifically, could you tell us if some of these measures that were taken are there really to stay and will inform what is the next policy framework for what concerns Portugal in the digital education sphere?
Yes, we had some. It was interesting that we had just launched an action plan for digital transition in education right before the pandemic hit us, and so some of the solutions that we had to adopt during the pandemic had to be accelerated, but they were already foreseen. So. In a way, the pandemic speed up things, but many of the measures were already being designed, and this included the infrastructural dimensions, so to have better access to internet, to provide connectivity to all students, also to provide equipments to all students, and to have always two very important pillars. One is pedagogical intentionality. So why do we want the digital in the schools? and also capacity building in teachers. All of this was accelerated, but none of this can be considered done, especially because, as I mentioned in my starting words, because we did this as an emergency response and not as a structured plan that had the time to be prepared. But the pandemic was an eye-opener for many of us and for many stakeholders in education, and for this reason, I really think that most of what we achieved will stay, but will stay hopefully in different terms. So we don't want digital education as an alternative to face-to-face learning. We want digital education fully integrated in curriculum development when students are in schools, when their teachers are with them. And then there's some areas that so when we think only in terms of digital resources, we are talking about platforms of communication that were developed and in which students and teachers became more proficient. We're talking about the role of tutorials that can be developed at a distance and also face-to-face. We are talking about the importance and the focus in curriculum terms on the issues of information literacy. We're talking about all the dimensions that have to do with cybersecurity, with the prevention of cyberbullying, but we're also talking about new digital resources, new instruments for learning, an evolution in terms of textbooks from paper to digital, and also let me come again to the dimension that has to do with social and emotional skills and even the access to culture. We have a national plan for arts that really embraced the digital challenge, and we can do more now. We can take students to museums. We have online concerts for students. We have broadcast of cultural events, and this has to do with the management of our emotions. And so I really think these are instruments and actions that were taken during the pandemic that will remain, but always with this awareness that hopefully we'll never go back home, and these are issues that can be developed and must be developed in school in the presence of teachers.
Thank you, Professor Costa. And indeed, we hope that we have learned at least something from this crisis, and that we can keep these lessons in front of us and very clear for the years to come. And the fact that it was indeed an eye-opener is an opportunity that we have to leverage, even though, of course, we don't want to sugarcoat what we all went through, of course. Now, Minister Caruana had to leave us a bit in advance for an unforeseen situation. So we're, of course, sorry that she couldn't stay with us until the end, but we thank her very much for being with us and finding the time in a definitely busy schedule for our conference today. And I instead take the chance to ask another quick question to Mr. State Secretary Pajak about, well, pretty much the same elements or the same question that I've asked Professor Costa. So what is actually there to stay of the measures that were implemented until now, a bit in a rush, perhaps in certain cases, but that has the chance to inform the future policy that you would implement in Croatia?
Yes, digital age is transforming society as a whole, especially educational system. The speed of development of IT equipment and digital tools, the speed of developing artificial intelligence, and its breakthrough in educational system with all its possibilities is growing every day. In that process, we have to pay special attention that we don't have any student who is left behind. Bridging the digital divide in education has to be our priority. We always have to have in mind that some students need our special care, and we have to be prepared to give all our support so that quality education is available for all, and that all students have the opportunity to achieve their full potential. The COVID-19 pandemic put in front of us many challenges, but it has also showed us that we are capable of overcoming all obstacles in building effective, inclusive, and engaging education in digital era. So that's all.
Thank you very much, State Secretary. Now we still have a couple of minutes. So as you know, we've asked you to possibly prepare a very short statement to come back to the very first question that we asked ourselves about how and whether and for which purpose digital education and inclusion should have been developed all together. So I would ask you maybe to help us summarize what we've discussed today, and especially focusing on what the purpose of doing so would be. And really, in one sentence, tell us again why, in your context, in your country, inclusion and digital education should be at the center of future education policy. And I would start from Professor Costa then.
I was having a problem with microphone. Well, I would say that they have to go hand in hand always with this view that one is more a tool, the other one is more a goal. So the digital is more an instrument, and inclusion is a major goal. And the reason why I say this is that maybe none of us knows for sure. We cannot tell for sure where we'll be in 50 years in terms of technological evolution, and we have to be very humble and go 50 years back and imagine how we would see some of the technology that we have now. But we know for sure that the values of humanity will remain, the need for inclusion will remain, and so since they are intertwined now, we have to bet on both and invest on both, but never lose the focus. The focus is equity, and so let's not dehumanize education.
Thank you, Secretary of State. And I would like to ask the same question then to State Secretary Pajak.
So my message, we have to work together, we have to cooperate together, because we are teaching the similar problems. Thank you for your invitation and the opportunity to share Croatian experience with you. Thank you.
Well, I'll thank you for really your contributions today. I think we had so far a very thorough path across the different sides and different elements that compose the important topic of inclusion in relation to digital education. We've started with our keynote speakers to really address several matters and several areas that we have to consider. And then with the three of you representing your ministries of education, we really had the chance to look at practically how these statements, these strategies can be implemented. And possibly we will stay with your messages, with your final takeaways that you kindly provided us with. And I would say we will try to make sure that future reforms processes that include the support and the development of digital education has an inclusion by design features, let's call it that way. And since our time is currently already over, it's time for me to give back the floor to my colleague Konstantinos for the next sessions. And thanks again to the panelists to join us today.
Thank you very much, Tommaso, for this very nice panel discussion, and all our guests for joining us and for accepting our invitation. Before we move on with the agenda, we will take now a longer meeting of about an hour for lunch and some of the off-screen activity. But of course, if you want, you can check out our Eminent platform, learn more about the sessions that are upcoming and the speakers that will join us for the next roundtable. And of course, you can also check the exhibition area and all our partners that are exhibiting there, and of course, learn more about the projects and activities of European Schoolnet. So see you again at 2 p.m. Central European Time, and have a nice break. Thank you.